Thank you everyone for joining us today. In our PRCA MENA webinar, we will be discussing the COP28 takeaways from the PR perspective. My name is Monika and I'm the head of PRCA EMEA. Our speakers today are Natalie Amos, the Managing Director Lifestyle MENA at Four Agency, and John Rynehart from 7 Media. First, thank you, Natalie and John, for joining us. And let's start with Natalie. Please, Natalie, could you give us a short introduction and brief about Four Agency?
Of course. Thank you so much, Monika. Great to see you and great to see John as well. And thank you to everyone who's joining us. So Four Agency, we recently renamed ourselves Four Agency Worldwide to reflect that the work that we do that is, as it says, completely worldwide. So we've been going for around 23 years. We have our base in London and Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and an office in Riyadh, but we do work all across the world and across the whole region. We're around 55 strong in the Middle East, and we work across a real variety of sectors. So everything from lifestyle, which I myself lead, which includes travel, tourism, sports, entertainment, events, and so on. We also have a very strong government team that does a huge amount of work within the government sector, again, across the MENA region. We also have a big corporate team working with incredible, blue chip brands all the way through to regional brands as well as international groups. And then we also have a very big PACE operation, which is digital, paid social, everything from influencers all the way to website builds and through to insights and so on. So yeah, very pleased to be here with everyone today.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you. And over to you, John. Can you tell us about 7 Media?
Yeah, hi, Monika. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good to be with you again. Natalie, hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So 7 Media was established around 15 years ago. We're a full 360 marketing communications agency working across the full spectrum of corporate, government, lifestyle, and consumer as well. We have offices in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Riyadh, which is where I'm calling in from today, hotel room here in Riyadh, had an event. So we have also our own standalone studios, so a full multimedia production unit covering video, editing, photography, design, so a full integrated marketing mix and end-to-end solution. I've been in the region for 20 odd years now, so seen a lot of change, a lot of development, and have been with 7 Media for about 18 months now. So delighted to be with you. Thank you very much for joining and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Thank you, Natalie. So let's start. Natalie, the first question will be for you. How did you build a campaign around COP28? What did you emphasize? What was your agency focusing on? Which industry sectors? And how did you create the messaging?
So I think COP has been really interesting because it was obviously announced just over 2 years ago that it was going to be held in the UAE. So we had a lot of time to build up. And we knew, because we do a huge amount of work within sustainability, we work on a real variety of ESG projects. And as I mentioned earlier, we cover absolutely the whole spectrum. So we really had the luxury to ensure that right from the very beginning that we were planning our messages. We actually ended up having, in the end, I've just counted, around 17 clients who were there, present at COP, pre-COP as well, in one way, shape or form. So that includes everything from renewables with Mazda, who we've worked with for some time, clean energy with Emirates Nuclear Energy Company that we've worked with for more than a decade, probably coming up to 14 years now, with youth, because we work with Youth for Sustainability, Wiser, which is Women in Sustainability, and we also had Abu Dhabi Business Women's Council, as well as handling the social media for COP, and a real variety in between. So we work with Museum of the Future, and we actually held a big event pre-COP, which was called Climate Future Week, which sort of in many ways set the scene ahead of COP. So we actually did a countdown to COP session, the Journey to COP it was called, and we actually had Dr. Sultan was there with us, and that engaged all members of the community, from youth to startups to SMEs, right through to corporates and to government. So we really, with COP, with having so many clients there and so many clients involved, we did just make sure that we had the head start. In terms of your question, just, what our strategies were, I think with anything, with any big high profile global event, you start right at the beginning. You look at what the government strategies are, you look at the global strategies. We spent a lot of time looking at, obviously, the UN SDGs. We were looking at, UAE net zero, obviously for our UAE-based clients. I did a lot of work. I did my master's a decade ago, more than a decade ago, in sustainability. I started that. So just making sure that, fundamentally for our clients, for them, for myself as well, many of our team, it was their first COP, but just to make sure that you're aligned with the overall objectives, the national objectives, and that you're speaking to your audience. Most of our clients had their particular stakeholders that they were talking to, whether it was SMEs or businesses or government or youth, and just making sure that we were having those conversations. I touched on Climate Future Week. That was great for us as an agency. We welcomed, over the week, it was around 6 days, we had more than 200 media attend. Some attended twice and so on, but it just meant that really helped us gauge what those conversations were, what people were asking, what types of things the media are in. Obviously, there's obviously the very high profile UN conversations, but it really helped us as communications experts really plan our strategies, and because we did have those 2 years to really look at and plan with our clients hand in hand. Many of us were writing 1 year countdown to COP op-eds, a year and a bit ago. So, we did have that luxury of time. And then I think the other part was just to be really nimble whilst on the ground. There were so many great events, there were so many conversations happening, there were so many empowering opportunities. I attended a WWF Emirates Nature event, which was about their plan to engage citizen scientists. They did a great interaction, a great event, which was about getting individuals and youth on board at the Extreme Hangout. So I think there were so many opportunities to be part of the conversation pre-COP and during COP. I suppose the challenge now is to be part of that momentum, part of changing that tide, I suppose, and making sure we're all aligned. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting. And John, over to you. What strategies does your agency use to effectively communicate on complex environmental issues to the public, making them more accessible? How did you break down the messages to different audiences, government, businesses, wider public? Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so thank you, Monika. Just a little bit of context to the work that we're doing during COP as well. So we worked with multiple Abu Dhabi government entities, and including the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi. So we handled all of the strategic framework for EAD. Over the course of the last sort of 12 months or so was pretty much the build-up ahead of COP. It's been a long planned and sustained build-up for EAD. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But certainly working on all of their narrative and messaging and identifying the right sort of audiences as well to communicate with. Additionally to that, we worked with the Scottish Government. So as many of you may know, Scotland hosted COP a few years ago, COP26 in Glasgow. So their narrative and messaging has continued, of course. And we worked very closely with them to prepare their communications and strategy, working very closely also with the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, to position him here in the region. So also additionally to that is multiple other Abu Dhabi government entities, so production work, media and PR and communications work. So a huge amount of on-ground work and planning and preparations has been underway certainly over the last 12 months or so. I think when it comes to developing and planning for strategies, the most important thing is to get in early. So we, as an agency, right back as early as March this year, started planning for EAD, if not before, probably the back end of last year, started really thinking about what are we going to be communicating? What is our actual objective here? I think importantly, what is the strategic objective that we're trying to achieve? Asking those really hard questions early on and giving ourselves enough time to plan and prepare not only the stakeholders, the audiences, but also how do we break down those stakeholders into individuals that we can communicate with defined and refined messages that can really resonate and connect with those audiences. And that's a big piece of work, and that's probably the most important piece of work in many respects, is spending that time workshopping, strategizing, really understanding the different audiences that we need to communicate with, and also what are the refined messages. What was really interesting for EAD was actually 60% of their communications and their strategy was focused around youth. Now, obviously, when it comes to COP and climate change, that is the next generation. So a lot of their content, a lot of their focus, a lot of their strategic narrative was about communicating with that younger audience. So it's obviously a slightly different narrative that you're going to have when it comes to communicating with the private sector or government, for example. So really defining that message and refining it as defined by the particular audience groups. So I think the main point there is planning, preparations, identifying audiences, and then individual storylines and content that can resonate and connect. One other piece that I'd add to that is about actually benchmarking and learning from past experiences. So, for example, what did we take away from the last COP that we can build on and refine and enhance? That's going to allow us to take us to the next level. And that, again, is a good starting point, because there's obviously key learnings when you go into an event like COP. And if you've got consistently engagement and involvement in an event like that, you can learn each year and grow and evolve. So I think that's an important aspect as well. And then really then mapping out a very clear timeline. A lot of the clients that we worked with were actually keeping it relatively simple, almost a 3-phased process, pre, during and post, and how do you then plan your content and your narrative during those key pillars, and refine then how you then communicate with those audiences during those particular phases. So I think that's certainly part of that strategic planning is key to really understand how your story is going to continue to evolve during those different phases.
Interesting. And you, Natalie, from your perspective, how did you break down the messaging to different audiences? And how did you actually measure the effectiveness of your messages, the success of your campaigns?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as John said, it is about really looking at your target audience and what the key measures are. Because we did a lot of work with youth. So we worked with schools. So, for example, with GEMS School, and also Youth for Sustainability, as I mentioned as well. So, really looking at, whether your audience is government, whether it's the private businesses, whether it's SMEs, just making sure that you're communicating the right messages. I mean, there's obviously the political discussions that are happening separately, but just ensuring that you're aligned with those goals, that you are communicating as well. I mean, one conversation that I had quite early on in around about September when I was planning with a client was the idea that don't just leave it to the politicians. The future of the planet is in all of our hands. So, one of the pieces of work that we were doing was around youth empowerment. As John said, they are the future generation. They will inherit the earth. So a lot of what we were saying was that, in terms of measurement, which I think is such an interesting question, which always comes up within our industry. Of course, how do we measure it? It is, it's just finished. Obviously the final paper has just been announced, and obviously, where we are, a lot of, still, looking at that and analysing what that actually means. So it is quite early to measure campaigns, but one of the checks and balances that I suppose we put in place was behaviour change, awareness. I mean, for example, 2 or 3 years ago, if you'd have surveyed the population of the UAE or youth, and said to them, unless they're huge fans of Greta Thunberg, if you'd have said, what is COP? Most people wouldn't know. Yet now everybody at every level within the UAE now very much understands what COP is. And I read an article last night from an international newspaper that said the fundamental winner of COP is the UAE, because of, the hosting of it, the organisation, the conversations, that were coming out of it. It's an oil nation hosting an event that is discussing, phasing out fossil fuels. So that is quite interesting. And then for each of our clients, as we always do with our campaigns, we build in that measurement. So, for some it was about, SMEs, about awareness there. For some it was about youth and youth involvement and youth actionism, which I think was a very important term that was discussed. It's not just about talking, it's about actionism at every level, at that grassroots level. So obviously our clients are very different, as I mentioned, some are renewables and some are alternative energy with ENEC, right through to, we work with Unilever, for example. We launched their very first electric van before COP, and part of that was the road to making the whole process more circularity, basically, within sustainability. So, you have to, right at the very beginning, look at what success is, and then post COP, now it's really about analysing how do we build on this and how do we ensure that everything that was discussed from a communications perspective, as well as with the actual corporate goals, is then aligned, and how do we measure it in 3, 6, 9 months and by the next COP. I mean, the ultimate success, I suppose, for COP28 is that that there's no COP30. We know that COP29 is going to be in Baku, but that is the ultimate success that that people are hoping for. So I always think measurement's a very interesting conversation to have, and we could go on for hours about it, I think.
Yeah, I might just add to that, if you don't mind, Natalie. It's measurement is obviously, in our industry, we know it's often questioned, what's the return on investment? And we know as an industry, we're always trying to prove our worth, and it's an ongoing battle, if you like, or a process. But I think, interestingly, if you can look at sort of simple tactics, perhaps, and for example, the Environment Agency implemented something really quite simple. If I can use an example, that they started in March, actually, and just using social media platforms to try and analyse and understand their audience's knowledge of climate change. So using very simple tools across social media, for example, so polls and surveys, so engaging their audiences and asking relevant, pertinent questions so they can get a real sense of their understanding of climate change, sustainability, environmental impact, all of these sort of key buzzwords, if you like, which then not only help to inform their strategic thinking and the types of messages and narrative, but they can now go back and in a week's time, post-COP, ask very similar types of questions and see if indeed the needle has changed and moved when it comes to knowledge, understanding, and also action. Are people going to actually take on these messages and change their habits? And I think that was a really simple exercise that worked, certainly for EAD. Put that in place early in the piece, get the insights, surveys, polls, etc., using quite simple tools, and then doing the same thing again post the event, and proper analysis and measurement, which allows you to sort of really understand, is the work that we're doing having impact? Are people changing? Is this creating some action? And I think that's a good example of what can be used as just a simple measurement tool. But we know, as communicators and working within the industry that we do, we're often having to, sell ourselves, show the impact that we're having on business, return on investment. But there are ways and means of doing it for sure.
Yeah, and one I want to share an interesting example, actually. So we work with Tailoring, which is waste, which is incredibly interesting because the UAE is very focused on waste and overall decarbonisation efforts. So they work with the UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment to launch Waste to Zero, which is a global initiative. So basically it was announced during COP, but it means it's now a springboard for discussion. It means that, that conversation is very much there. It's about raising awareness. It helps with financing. So personally, some of the most interesting sessions that I attended were about green financing. And that was one of the pillars of COP, as we know, to talk about how financing can be achieved and how, you know, people really adopt this focus on, you know, net zero. So I think that's a very good example of something that was announced. And also with Emirates Nuclear Energy, there was a commitment by 9 countries to triple the investment, you know, in nuclear energy. So that was overall endorsed by 21 countries as well. So, you know, that's by 2050. So again, you know, just having these conversations at COP, they're taking place on a global stage, you know, and just giving, you know, those, you know, examples of, you know, net zero and alternative energy a platform, and having that alignment and that international focus. One of the other winners that I thought as well in terms of measurement was some of the homegrown brands and some of the local brands. So, you know, again, because of the number of media that were flying in to cover COP, international media, there were brands, for example, so who perhaps were not on the international stage before, suddenly had a platform, and, you know, their communications teams had the opportunity to start conversations with international media from other markets and global titles that they might not normally engage with. So again, I think that for those teams and for those agencies, that's a great, you know, measurement to be able to say, you know, last year we engaged with 10 international media, this year it was 50, you know, and so on. So yeah, I do think that, you know, once those conversations start, you know, that is something to really build upon, you know, particularly as it was such a landmark event, and the work, you know, until the next COP presidency, the next year, you know, that work will continue. So let's see what happens in 12 months' time.
No, let's see. Huh? So as we wrap up, what are your insights on the anticipated evolution of the ESG in the next 3 to 5 years? And how can our industry enhance its practices to contribute to positively ESG goals, to attain the ESG goals? John.
Yeah, well, look, we know that ESG is going to continue to be on the agenda. There's no doubt about that. But it does come with some negative connotations. Some companies are wanting to remove themselves from ESG because of you know, sensitivities around greenwashing, for example. So, however, we know that we've all got to focus on this. This is a global challenge, and companies do need to recognise that they have a role and a responsibility in this process. As communicators, I think importantly for us, it's about how we show that level of support. And I think critically in that process is transparency. So really being able to communicate our messages accurately, also comprehensive reporting, really showing how companies are diversifying their strategies and their thinking when it comes to climate change, and the types of activations and the type of work that they're doing to make an impact and change the course. So it will continue to be a focus for companies. We know that it will continue to be a focus for government. And as communicators, we have a role and a responsibility to help tell those stories. Fundamentally, it comes back to storytelling, doesn't it? So, and how we do that in a really effective, engaging way. We know that attention spans are short now. So telling that story visually through compelling content, shorter form content, video, animations, infographics, we can be part of that process of knowledge sharing, really educating our audiences and driving that narrative of change and action. So we have a critical role to play. We know that, and we need to be part of it.
Good. So I will now go for the question and answers part of the webinar. So I have a first question for Natalie. So Natalie, do you have any recommendations for brands that participated in COP in the green zone and want to build on this?
Right, yeah, I think that's a great question. So, I mean, absolutely, the green zone, you know, was fantastic. There were so many interactive and engaging events. I think, as John said, that is our responsibility to make sure that brands really build on their presence at COP, and they ensure that it isn't just, you know, 12 days, a 12-day event, you know, that doesn't, you know, finish and that's the end of it. You know, it is a ongoing process. I think speaking with your clients, if you're an agency, or if you are the client, if you're in-house, I think just making sure that those conversations and those strategies are built into plans. I think a lot of the work that was done at COP was quite tactical. And I think that the opportunity now is to sort of, look at the ground where, what took place, what the successes were, and to really build on those and make sure it's really strategic, and just make sure that everyone within the organization, from the bottom to the top, is absolutely aligned with those strategies and gets involved. It's not just one person who's the sustainability director or ESG director. It's not just a small part of communications. It really should fit into everything that we do. So as an agency, we are already working on plans. We have been even, pre-COP. We're working on our post-COP plans and our platforms and those analysis pieces. So I think that that's a great way to build upon it and to talk about those successes. Years ago, I remember a brand said, talking about sustainability, so they were asked, it was an old client, do you think that everyone will copy and do what you're doing? And they said, well, we hope so. It was a hotel within the travel industry. They said, well, we hope so, because if everyone's doing what we're doing, then the world will be a much better place, because Mother Earth is our client, let's say, and we are all stakeholders. So I think just making sure that we really fundamentally build on it and are strategic in our approach, not just the tactics. We need to have the plans in place, the ESG plans, the reporting, which is incredibly important, that transparency. And we also need to call out our clients if we think it might be greenwashing. I think we need to say, do you have the data to back this up? Do you have the, can we put this into a report? And I think clients can often be quite cautious about reporting, but that's the point of it. That's the point of ESG. It's a journey. No one expects you to have all the answers or to be, 100% there. We're 2024 almost, 2030 is away, is still, we're at that sort of that 7-year point, great, the global stock take, and many organizations have net zero 2050. You have to have those conversations now, and if you're not having them, then then you need to really look at your plans and make sure it is. So yeah, that's my perspective.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. I have a question for John, and it's on crisis communication. So the question is, in the event of unforeseen challenges or crisis during COP28, what crisis communication strategies do you recommend for maintaining a positive public image?
Well, I think it comes back to my original point. It's planning and preparation. So going into any major event like COP, you would need to think about scenarios that could impact your brand, and brand reputation matters. So critically important is that planning process, ensuring that you are scenario planning and thinking about the types of issues that may potentially crop up, and putting in narratives and messaging to address that, should indeed that come at any point throughout an event like COP or any other major brand or project that you're working on. So there's simple things as well, social listening, data and insights, analytics, understanding the sentiment and the tone of the language that's being used related to either your brand or more generally the event such as COP that you're involved in. I think really important, making sure that you understand what's being discussed, analysing that, preempting how you might respond should indeed that impact your own business or your brand. And then ensuring that you are nimble in approach and being able to then react and respond quickly. I touched on transparency. We know the importance of that, being able to be really clear in your messaging, transparent, open, and then being able to address any matters that might come up. And so I think if you have those sort of fundamental basics in place, then you're almost a step ahead. Should indeed there be a reputation matter or an issue or a major crisis that you need to address.
Okay, I have one question from SB. I don't know who SB is. And the question is, how did your team tackle some of the unfavorable media coverage in international titles about UAE, an oil producer hosting a climate change conference? So I don't know if Natalie or John, if one of you wants to reply to that.
Look, I don't mind. I might as well continue if you don't mind on the planning and preparation. I think it's the same sort of message. You know, if I use EAD, the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi, so we spent just prior to COP, we were obviously very aware of the narrative and the messaging and the context of the Western media and the focus. We knew that was going to enhance even more so during COP itself. I was actually in Australia for a little bit of COP at the front end of COP, and it was interesting seeing that Western media perspective and the way that they were reporting on COP down there as well. And they have their own issues in relation to climate change, of course. But of course, it's about understanding that perspective, that narrative that's coming through in Western media. The Environment Agency, just prior to engaging media at COP itself, started planning very comprehensively, really understanding and having the right spokespeople in a room, workshopping their messaging, trying to, in some ways, also preempt approaches. We saw during the course of COP, where media were more or less door-stopping the president and the chairman and just, you know, getting that camera in their face and asking lots of difficult questions. How do you control that process? How do you try and plan and prepare for that? And that's a really intricate model that needs to be refined as you go into a big event like that, making sure that your spokespeople understand the narrative, the messaging, have your communications team around them to try and give yourself some time. So it's not always immediately addressing the questions that are coming in at that particular moment, but buying yourself a little bit of time, controlling it, giving the access that the media do want, and it will come, but in a planned and prepared, controlled process, I think helps, because then it's a way of then trying to obviously then work collaboratively with the media, so the end result is successful and favorable for the brand. So I think if you put those elements in, then there's a way and a means to try and help alleviate some of those challenges when it comes to Western style aggressive media that might want to ask difficult, sensitive questions.
Yeah, I want to add a little bit to that, actually. I won't mind. Thank you, SB. I think it's a great question, and one, as John said, we all debated over and grappled with. I mean, that's kind of the point of it, you know, the fact that it's an oil nation hosting an event that has, it's trying to unite in many ways the private sector and the public sector, and the oil, producers, and everything that goes with that. Fundamentally, those conversations are being undertaken when there's, as with any COP, there's island nations that are on the front, the front lines of climate change. There's destinations all around the world, that are really facing the challenges. So you have to have everyone in the room, and you have to have those difficult challenges and those difficult questions, which is why obviously debates were ongoing, because, you've got so many different opposing and voices, but we all have to agree on an end goal, which is that our planet needs our attention, and we need to do something to get where we need to be. So I think that was probably the beauty of it. And for many ways, I was watching the media conversation unfold, and we all preempted it. We all know it was going to happen, and then the conversations took place, and they were widely reported. So I think you have to put everyone in the room, as I said, to be able to have that. And I think good communications people obviously knew that right from the beginning and had their strategies in place. And at the same time, you have to be aware, and you have to be nimble as well. So it was great seeing so many international media here, and it was great to see those stories. And finally, it was great to see protesters at COP as well. It was good to have an inclusive, diverse, open, discussed COP. So I think it was a very good event from that perspective.
Okay, I have the last question, if each of you can reply very briefly. So what strategies should comms and PR managers employ to ensure that they are part of the sustainability conversation post-COP, post-COP?
There you go, John.
Very briefly, please.
Look, I think that this is an ongoing discussion, isn't it? This story doesn't stop at the end of COP. There's no hard full stop here. In some ways, the narrative and the positioning of all of this has to continue, and the debate has to continue. So, whilst this has been a huge focus locally, regionally, obviously internationally as well, that story has to continue, and we know that the COP will be coming around every 12 months. So this narrative and the focus, the agreements that were taken on board, we saw, towards the end of COP just how important wording is, literally down to some words that needed to change during the agreements in those final stages of COP, and that was obviously in the work that we do is around the narrative and the messaging. So this will continue. We know that, that this is a huge focus for governments and for the world. So from that perspective, we have a key role as communicators to be part of that process, to continue to drive that narrative and continue to address some of the issues, support our clients with impactful educational campaigns that's going to help really drive and change people's actions, and that's critical in the work that we'll be doing, of course, as this challenge continues well into the future and for the next generation.
Great. So thank you very much. I have just one comment that I would like to share with you. It says, it's from Jane, and she says, thank you for this session. Great and much needed conversation. Brilliant to see on the heels of COP. Thanks for bringing in these experts. So thank you, John. Thank you, Natalie. Your session is well appreciated.
Great.
I hope that we will meet again soon. I hope that all the COP challenges and the next will be resolved in the future very soon, very, very near future. Thank you very much. And I will see you next time.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you, Monika. And thank you to everyone who came on board to join the session.
Thank you.
Thank
Natalie.
you.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Monika. Take care.